Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, a hotter sex life, or a powerful legacy. Find out how good your life can be on this episode of Man Alive. Also, as I've supported men in their love and work lives for 15 years now, many men ask for the right words to say to be more successful, attractive, and desirable. But I found it's not so simple as giving scripts or lines because every man is different. So giving words or scripts would be like giving a tall, thin man a shorter, wider man's pants, or vice versa. The words have to make sense for you and your personality, and there's so much happening beneath the surface that people are responding to. If you're interested in how to become a better lover and leader in your own unique way, go to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz, or you can text ALIVE to 44144. It only takes a couple minutes and you'll start to get an idea of how you can be both more respected and desired. After you fill it out, we can schedule a time to review your quiz and talk about your specific challenges and desires. So again, go to either shanajamescoaching.com/quiz or text ALIVE to 44144. That's ALIVE to 44144. Enjoy this episode of Man Alive. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Man Alive. I'm your host, Shana James, and I'm thrilled to be here today with Owen Marcus. Owen, thank you for joining me.
My pleasure.
Owen is one of the founders of Everyman, and we are going to talk today about transforming trauma and stress. And these days in the world, it's a pretty stressful time. There's a lot happening, between the politics, the environment, business, the pandemic. It's just, stress all around. So this feels particularly important. And then as, I would imagine you would see this as well, that the current stress can bring up a lot of past trauma. And so then, people can get even more ungrounded and more disoriented and out of whack. And so it's a particularly really, challenging time.
It is. And you're right. I mean, so often, because we work with men and, men come to us and they're under stress and, often it's around a relationship, but what we find no matter when, and let alone now, is that what often is really setting them up is a lot of old stress or trauma. Yeah. And then the most recent incident really pushes them over the edge.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So for people who don't yet know you, I'm going to give you a little intro and then we can dive into that. For over 40 years, Owen Marcus has explored and developed programs that bring together mindfulness, somatic psychotherapy, and the science of emotional physiology. His men's groups and this alternative model were the focus of the documentary about men, and his book, Grow Up, A Man's Guide to Masculine Emotional Intelligence, lays out how to complete the 9 stages of emotional maturation for boys and men. As the director of education at Everyman, Owen, along with his co-founders, continues to develop effective ways to use emotions and physiology as tools to create fulfilling relationships and purposeful lives. So thank you, first of all, for this really, really important work in the world, especially for men. And I know that you've been on your own personal journey. Could you say a little bit about, how did you get into this? Why did you choose this path?
Well, it sort of chose me. I mean, I needed this, so I started doing it. I back in the 70s, I ended up in Boulder, and I ended up learning how to be a rolfer and had been a rolfer, which is a kind of body work for all these years.
Yeah.
But also, I began my professional training in somatic psychotherapy with some of the founders of Ron Kurtz, Peter Levine. They were friends and teachers of mine back in the late 70s, early 80s when I was in Boulder. Nice. And one thing led to another, and I'd gone through a lot of change and healing of my dyslexia, my Asperger's, but I realized that I was still not really having successful relationships with women. They weren't bad, but they weren't good. And then it just hit me, well, maybe by working with men that I could learn some. And then I realized how resistant I was to that. And then that told me that, well, if I'm that resistant or scared, I probably should.
I probably should go toward that.
So that was like in 95 when I had a medical clinic in Scottsdale. And so I started my first group one evening in that clinic, and it was mediocre, but I knew there was something there. And to shorten the long story, 16 years ago, I redesigned the model of men's group and really men's work because I said I wanted to do something that would work for me and
Yeah.
that I would enjoy being in, and I would suspect that other men would. So I asked 11 guys, they all said yes, and that was the beginning of the Sandpoint Men's Group, which has now been well over 300 men. We
Wow.
have 4 groups with probably over 40 guys in these 4 groups currently, and it's an organization now that just runs itself. It's a
Wow.
nonprofit, and we do weekly groups, and now most of the groups have Zoom, but we still have some live groups. And out of that ended up creating a whole method of working with men that really kept on working and kept on being developed. And these guys, I tease them,
Yeah.
were my beta testers.
Yes.
And that was really the setup for Every Man, which started about 3.5 years ago.
Yeah. And for men who don't have a background of men's group, can you give a little taste of what happens there? What's so powerful about it?
Yeah. So what happens in these groups, be it real or virtual, is these guys show up. Often they don't know each other.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a simple set of protocols, for example, confidentiality.
Yeah.
And they meet for an hour and a half. And our groups meet, at least when they were live, for 4 hours, most of like within the 2-hour range.
Yeah.
And we have a simple little protocol where each guy does a quick check-in, and then we just go deeper around the group, and each guy gets a chance to speak about what's up for him, or speak about maybe it's a prompt or a topic of that night.
Uh-huh.
And one of the distinctions, particularly with the work that we do with Every Man, is it's not a cognitive discussion.
Yes.
It's an emotional discussion where the focus is in taking that man deeper into his own experience.
Yes.
Because it's my or our belief that what's happened is that as we've grown up, through our maturation into being a man, we've gotten disconnected from our parts.
Yeah.
And so when we can slow men down and help them get reconnected to these disconnected parts, they end up solving their own problems.
Yes. Yes. I love that. I see that in my work as well. It's like so much about, supporting a man to be able to find his own resources, his own strength, his own clarity. And often when men come to me, there's a lot more head, mind, intellectual, way of relating to reality than heart, body, soul, right? And that it's like that isn't a taught way of relating to the world in our culture these days.
It's not taught, it's not modeled. And so one of the great things about these groups is they start seeing guys being authentic or vulnerable.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, that's a powerful experience. I used to think being vulnerable is being weak.
Yes.
And it's, these guys say all the time, like we do these global calls where we'll have someone on and then we put these guys in small drop out or breakout groups
Mm-hmm.
for, maybe 15, 20 minutes at most. And they come back saying, I didn't know these guys, but it was amazing, how I realized I'm like them and they're like me, and everyone just chills out and they just feel so real and accepted. And that's such the antithesis of what, as men, that we were trained.
What they thought.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So once most guys see it, they go, I want more of that.
Yes. Yes. It's a little different for me as a woman, but I was leading a group of 5 men through something the other night. And one of them said, oh my God, I've never talked about my inner critic. I've never talked about my judge or my inner critic with anyone before. And now to hear from other men and realize it's not that different. I mean, everybody has their own slight differences, or it's a different tone of voice or a different way of, picking on me. But oh my God, the fact that we all have this, there's so much freedom and a sense of, it doesn't make me weak. It's just part of being human.
Exactly. And part of what, to get back to where we started around trauma, that these guys start to realize a lot of the things that were taking them out are where I would call their survival mechanisms.
Yeah.
So I said, look, that was great, Joe. That worked when you were a kid because that's what got you here. It worked and it allowed you to survive.
And
that's
needed
the only tool that you had. You needed it. But now that tool is your saboteur, and it's taking you out of your relationships.
Yeah, exactly. So powerful. So it sounds like you have a method that you use to transform stress and trauma into, what would you say you transform it into?
Into an asset, like with my stress and trauma, my Asperger's and dyslexia, which in part was a function of stress and trauma. my experience is that once you sort of decharge it, or get it out of being a saboteur, or a problem, that you're always left with its power, its assets.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you see that too. So that's one thing. And then for guys, as we were saying before, to sort of de-shame a lot of this stuff really relaxes the process. And the central process is really slowing guys down, because that's like the core. We just slow them down, slow down their thinking, slow down their physiology. And one of the ways that we get guys so connected to their emotions is we get them connected to their bodies.
Yes.
And for a lot of guys, it's easier to connect to their bodies first than their emotions. Like when someone years ago said, "Oh, and what do you feel?" I'd roll my head or give them some intellectual explanation.
I feel.
Exactly. Then I started to finally realize that none of that was feelings. It was just my mind tripping out.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So you slow men down and you help them connect to their bodies, because, it can be a little more airy or woo woo to, think about heart, or, what's your heart feeling, or what emotions are you feeling? So you can actually get down to like the grit and the brass tacks in a way of, my stomach is tight, or.
Exactly. Like in our groups, it was an easy thing we get a new guy in, and, some guy might ask Sam a question, and Sam gives the typical intellectual answer, and we let the guy go on for a while.
Yeah.
Then someone will say, "Hey, Sam, what do you feel?" And then he's, and he probably says something that basically says he doesn't feel anything.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we see he's clenching his fists, he's tapping his feet. So what we might do is, "Well, Sam, notice your fists. What does it feel like there? Notice your feet." So we spend a few minutes having him notice the things that we notice with his body, is his physiology, how his body's responding. Mm-hmm. And often once you start doing that with a guy, he'll naturally just say what he's feeling emotionally. And if he doesn't, if you ask him, "What do you feel emotionally?" then he's able to connect.
Yes. Great. And then where do you go from there? Because I imagine there's more of a path that you take transforming.
Well, and so we have this rock formula I created, which is ROC. So the first one's to relax, which is the slow down part, and start to allow experiences to come to you. And the second one's the O, to open up and really be vulnerable, but vulnerable first to his own experience.
Yes.
Which is really, sometimes, again, being vulnerable to his physiology, and then being vulnerable to his emotions.
Yeah. And can you say how you think about vulnerability?
In one way, we'll frame it as just being authentic. Mm-hmm. And another way, it's allowing what's happening to happen.
To actually happen, instead of blocking it or defending against it,
or trying to control it, minimize it, or whatever. And to really be vulnerable to your experience. And I was just on a phone or a Zoom call with one of my coaching clients, and he was going into a therapy session with his wife. And I said, "Look, it's not about being successful. It's just about taking that action. And if you're shaking, that's great." Being vulnerable to really what's happening. And one of the things that we use in Every Man is we do this rock formula, and then we say, do it towards action. And so it's not about just taking the action in a disconnected way, which is how we're trained as men, but using the catalyst of that action to stir stuff up. And so if you're taking action and you're talking to, say, your partner, and it's scary, that you're as vulnerable as you can be, to the point where your voice could shake, your hand might be shaking. And if you really let your body have that experience, what you are doing is you're actually healing your PTSD.
Yes.
You might not heal it all in one incident, but you're breaking it down. So the next time you do something similar, it's that much easier.
Yeah. I always love when men talk about this, because, as a woman, I think it's more expected in a way to come from me, but it can also be discounted in certain ways, where men can be like, "Yeah, but you're not a man, right? You don't know what it's like." And I get that, right? That's true. And I'm a great person to practice with, especially for a man who's going to go home and have a conversation with a woman who, he's never been vulnerable with a woman before. And I think there's just something so powerful about hearing from you as a man, right? That as shaky as you can be, as vulnerable as you can be, it's actually not there's nothing weak about it. It's not, you're not going to die. I like to work with that piece around respect, right? Where I find that sometimes women can have a hard time with it. Ultimately, I think there is a lot more respect and intimacy and ability to connect, but there's also some work we have to do with women sometimes to help them learn to be with the vulnerability from men that they've never been with before.
And we see that happen, and we work with the guys around that.
Yes.
And one of the things I say to the guys is that, look, in this culture, we're trained that women are the emotional experts, and they become like their emotional responsible party in relationships because we just put that on them. Yes, they step up for it, but it's a collusion that we're all into.
Yeah.
And so, like it or not, I say to guys, often you have to be the guy that goes into the cave and prove that there's no bear in there. You got to take that emotional risk that really says that the space is safe. Yeah. So when you do it and your voice is shaking, you're really leaning into your vulnerability, what your partner's feeling and maybe even thinking is, oh, wow, it really is this safe, because if he's doing it, then I can take my risk.
I can do it too. Yeah.
And if you want her to do it or him to do it, you got to often do it first.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are, I've seen men come back to me and say, well, my wife or my partner, didn't appreciate it, didn't like it. She walked away. She was, upset by it. And I think I would imagine you also work with men, as I do, on what to do in those situations.
Right. And, and as you probably tell them, some of the times the woman's scared because suddenly the game changed.
Yes.
And implicitly you're asking her to be vulnerable.
Yes.
And it might take a while.
Yeah.
And not, just because she didn't respond the first time, you don't give up.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we're on the O of rock, right? The opening up. And then what's
so
the
you open
C?
up to your vulnerability, to your own vulnerability. And then you open up to the other person's vulnerability.
Yeah. So,
if we're, interacting and, you say something that impacts me, I let that impact me.
Yes.
And I was just saying to another client, you let that impact you, I said to him. And when you respond from your impact, from your vulnerability, not from your head.
Yeah.
And so respond in an emotional way, with most emotional language, not intellectual language.
Yes.
And so that he really feels that, you heard that person.
Yeah.
And heard him, not just intellectually, not that you understood it, but you were impacted, you felt it.
Yes. Yeah, right. The difference between hearing something while also sort of defending against it or having different ideas going through your head or even interrupting versus really putting yourself in someone else's shoes and imagining what that would be like and, feeling on that, letting yourself be impacted in your heart, in your...
It's scary.
Yeah.
Particularly, as you know, for guys, when we're so trained not to do that. So not only feeling it scary, but maybe even the scarier part is, then what do I do with it?
Right. How do you answer that one?
And well, it's sort of like what we we're just saying. You just do it imperfectly. Yeah. And you're probably doing it better than you think you are. But again, we're real critical with our emotional expression.
Yeah.
And so we're not going to get good at it unless we practice it. So just do it. And my experience is that in most cases, you can do it imperfectly, but because you're doing it in a vulnerable way, people are really forgiving because they'll feel and sense that that's scary for you or that's new for you. And they'll be a lot more compassionate. If you come at them with an intellectual answer, they will be critical. Yeah. But if you come at it from an emotional, vulnerable response, in most cases, the person will start to melt or they'll be more compassionate or more patient and really, if not directly, indirectly encourage you to keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking about one of the conversations a client of mine was talking about recently around, his wife not really being willing or wanting to be emotionally connected or sexually connected. And we were doing a little bit of a role play and, there's something around, well, what if she says it's supposed to just be easy or it should be easy? And I said, okay, well, what might you say? And the first answer was a little more heady and intellectual, like, okay, well, you try and go find that somewhere else. And I was like, okay, wait, let's check in with like, what's actually happening in your own heart, right? What's your longing around, easy versus really challenging? And he got to this place where he was like, yes, I wish that too, right? I would love for it to be easy, and it's not. And, here's where we are in this moment, right? Which created a completely different conversation
It
than,
does, but as guys, we default to performance.
yeah,
And so we interpret everything around, am I doing a good job? And
yes,
then if I think I'm not, and then I'll get defensive.
yes, yes. So how do you navigate that before we get to the C? How do you navigate that struggle around
With
performance?
performance,
Yeah,
sort of what you were just saying. I mean, just slow down and just acknowledge you have this urge to respond, to perform,
right.
but also you could say feel the little boy, feel the vulnerable part, feel what that performance is protecting,
Yeah,
feel the other part of you and what it wants,
yeah,
and connect to that. And you don't have to understand it. You don't even have to be able to articulate it, but at least acknowledge it. Because
yeah.
by acknowledging it for yourself in some energetic or mirror neuron way, that person you're interacting with will pick that up.
Yes, I can speak to that from the women's side, right? As soon as a man starts to feel more of his body when I'm in his presence, I start to feel more of my body, right? Or as soon as he starts to feel more of his heart, and this isn't even gendered, it's just
Right.
humans, but
Well, and with that, to feel your body or for me to feel my body, I have to feel safe,
yes.
which means that I'm not in a survival or sympathetic or stress response,
Yeah.
which is,
Yeah.
a defensive response. So I shift from, in some kind of survival response to that parasympathetic, more relaxed, open experience that's where connection happens.
Yeah.
That's where creativity happens. That's where healing happens.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, it's so beautiful. Okay, so how about the C? What's the
So
C
the
in
C
rock?
is connect. So once you slow down and you're relaxed and you open up yourself and you're open and vulnerable to others, and then pretty much the urge is to reach out and connect
Yeah.
and receive other people's connections. Because
Mm-hmm.
we need, and the science has proved that, the whole attachment theory talks about how we need connection.
Yeah.
But we don't need connection from the performance place, from the intellectual place. We need it from the human place,
Yeah.
vulnerability. And that's sort of an imperfect place, and it's a risky place.
Mm-hmm.
But to reach out for connection really invites the other person to come in. And so, yeah, you might, or I might reach out, and there's no guarantee that you're going to respond.
Yeah.
So that's scary, and
That's
particularly for
scary, right?
guys,
That's risky.
real risky to,
Yeah.
to, to reach out, particularly from that more vulnerable place.
Yes. Right. From the less vulnerable place, the defended place, it's like, whatever, she can stay or go, but from the actual feeling it, the actual vulnerable place where you
Right.
really feel the impact.
And one of the, we're seeing the whole flashback, pushback on all the pickup stuff. And
Yeah.
so guys are going, I could have the script, which is a very performance thing, and it sort of works. But even if it works, I'm not there. It's the
No.
script's there with that woman.
Right.
I'm not there.
I'm not there. Yeah. Then I don't even get to receive the pleasure, the excitement, the love, right? It doesn't even get in.
Right. And so there was a guy on one of our calls the other day, and he was talking about that and what, how do I shift from, being so focused on, getting a woman and performance, because when I'm myself, I can't talk.
Mm,
And I'm sure you see that with guys.
I do.
And so, yeah, we worked with that. And, and that's one of the things we say to these guys. Well, then practice in your group.
Practice. Yeah. One of my clients today said, well, how do I pay attention to like the tone and the body language and the way her lips are moving and all of that, and actually think?
Right.
And I was like, well, that's just, that's practice. And I did that. What is it? Like, not patty cake where you pat your head and
right.
rub your belly, like for,
I can't do that.
Right. And, but you can after you practice, right?
Right.
So it's like expanding your consciousness to be able to pay attention to way more things than we originally thought we were going to pay attention to.
Right. And the simple answer I give those guys, because that was a question yesterday, is slow down and feel your own experience.
Yeah.
So respond from your experience, because you'll learn quicker that way. And then your experience will teach you things, and you'll observe your experience and observe other people because you're slowed down, you're having your own experience, where you can read all the books about body language.
Yeah.
And face reading and everything else. And this is where I started, and it's overwhelmed.
Yes.
But when I slowed down and started feeling myself, and then it was really easy to read the subtle cues of
Yes.
someone else. And this is, what I do with guys, where they might talk for 1 minute, but in that 1 minute there was like one word that just was like at a different frequency. And I'm sure you get this. And that word is the portal into taking that guy deeper. So you said you were resigned. Tell me about that resigned. And suddenly it opens up this whole cadre of other things that he wasn't even aware of.
Yes. Yes. So powerful. Yeah. It's like a portal into those deeper places. Yeah.
And you get good at that. And that portal can be taking that woman deeper, not in a therapeutic way, but in a connection, romantic way. Because that's really what seduction's about.
Yes.
Yeah, but you can't seduce someone unless they feel safe.
Right. And women in particular are tracking for safety. Do I feel safe with this guy? Is what's happening on the outside the same as what's happening on the inside? Because if not, my spidey sense goes off and I might not be safe and he might explode or something awful might happen.
And he could be, a vast majority of the times, he's a good guy.
Yes.
But because he's disconnected from his experience, he's telling himself that he's not safe because he's saying his experience is not safe. Right. So she's picking up, well, if he can't be okay with his own experience, how the hell is he going to be okay?
How am I going to be safe? Right? How is he going to be okay with my experience? Exactly. Yeah. Yep. So true.
And so, that's the simple rock formula that we get these guys to start to master connection, but not from their head, but from their own experience.
Yes. Yes. Right. And that place of, I don't have to pre-plan what I'm going to say or what I'm going to ask, because then I'm not actually there in the moment, but actually, what happens when I'm paying attention and responding to those cues? And like you said, how it impacts me.
Right. And I was just saying to a guy that I was terrible at picking women up. Terrible, because I couldn't do that being dyslexic. I mean, I trip over my words. But if I ever felt, and when I did feel a connection with a woman, it just flowed. It was easy.
Yeah.
It was, and it always worked out.
Yeah.
But I needed a connection. Now, I didn't understand all the stuff I understand now, but I understood that. But I kept on trying to, perform. And every time I would perform, I would fail.
Yeah. Yeah. Which in a way turns out to be a good thing, because then you realize, I don't have to actually perform.
Right. It turned out to be, but
it's painful.
Didn't think it was a good thing back then.
No, of course not. Of course not. Okay. So as you work with men and help them shift from trauma and stress into, more of their own strength, more of their own freedom, choice, connection, intimacy, all of that, I'm just curious, what do you want to, what would you feel upset if you didn't communicate with men on this podcast, right? Like if we're going to wrap up now, what feels most important that you want men to know? And I just demonstrated, right, how you can like totally stumble over a question and not get it right and not have it smooth, but then you can actually, it can be real, right? It can be genuine.
Yeah, right. So that is a bit of a panic, which is great. I want guys that first to accept themselves. Yeah. Which gets back to what we were saying about just slowing down and being vulnerable. And, from there, the rest of it starts getting easy. And keep leaning into that, the rock formula, or that, slowing down, being vulnerable to your own experience. And from that experience, reaching out and being willing to fail. And so I tell these guys, if you go learn a sport, you don't expect to be a master at that sport. And in fact, some of the reasons that you do it is because it's a challenge. Because if it was really easy, you wouldn't be doing it.
You'd be bored and you'd be like, this is no fun.
But like a good sport, find some team members to do it with, which is, the group. So it's easier, it's more fun, you get the support, and you're sort of doing it together. Yeah. And that's the other thing is guys, this, particularly as we get older, we get more and more of that lone wolf.
Yeah.
And it only makes it harder for ourselves. Yeah. And so I guess the thing to wrap it up would be, we all need connection. Admit that you need connection. Yes. Admit that you weren't trained to how to do it, and get the training that you need to to learn how to connect in a way that really is nourishing for you and the other person.
I love that, right? Not settling for this feels kind of dead, or this feels, disconnected, or I'm in a relationship, but I feel more alone than I do even when I'm by myself. Actually, reaching out and getting support and
Yeah, and
putting
I've
it
been there
together.
and taken the risk, because this is, you probably do it, but I do with a lot of my clients. I push them to speak up,
Yeah.
because most of us are nice guys, like Glover's book, Mr. Nice Guys.
Yeah.
And so it's hard for us to assert our feelings and needs.
Yes.
But I tell these guys so many at a time, that's what transforms a relationship. I had a guy on a call a week ago, and it was one of these calls for a membership. And he was talking about his ex-girlfriend and how hard it is to talk to her, and she interrupts him and this and that. And I just said, have you ever been real with her?
Yeah.
Have you ever told her what you felt, particularly when she was doing it?
Particularly when she's interrupting you. Yeah.
Yeah. And she says, no. I said, no, go try it. Just to, complete your relationship. So he's on a call yesterday, and he's telling all of us he did what I suggested, and they're back together again. They're lovers again, and it's better than it's ever been.
Yes, that is what happens.
All you had to do is speak up.
Yeah, right. It is what happens. And there are a couple of clients I have right now who are in the midst of those hard conversations. And sometimes it happens immediately, and sometimes it takes really sticking with it and, being willing to have that conversation 10 times if someone's kind of dense to it, but you still don't have to give up on yourself.
Right. And part of it is, what do you got to lose? Because if that relationship's not working out, it's
already lost.
Some level, and probably she or he is already written off the relationship. So just go for it. So at the least, even if it goes sideways, you end the relationship, you're going to end a different person.
Yes. I love it. I love it. Thank you. Thank you so much for this. And thank you for the work that you're doing with men and, making it much more approachable and that every man would have it. So where can men find more of you?
Every man. So it's EVRYMAN. So it's the second E's missing. So everyman.com. Just check us out. We have these free global calls on Tuesday night where we bring people in, and so the person speaks, and once a month, at the end of the month, it's co-ed. And then we do the breakout groups. And then we have these free, what we call digs or drop-in groups, where, a guy can just show up and do a mini group for an hour. Awesome. With a man that, one of our guys that's leading it. And then we have our membership that has much more.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for your work. And thank you for being such a champion for men.
You're welcome. I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and it gave you something to consider and explore in your life. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz or text the word ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144 to get a sense of how you can become a better lover and leader. You'll start to see how you can be both more respected and desired in your unique and genuine way. If you don't feel as confident or as excited about life or love as you'd like to be, this quiz is a really great starting point and will guide you toward a more passionate love life and a more inspiring and successful career. So again, text ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144 or head over to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.